Hi, friends and fellow educators. Thanks for giving Pug Math a shot and for watching this video and letting me know if Pug Math is any good or if it's not, what we might be able to work on, or if it is, like some other things that we can work on to make it better. So my goal with Pug Math was I searched all over for apps that would allow my students to just practice the steps behind solving equations without letting the computation get in the way. Frequently, they would do the steps correctly, but the computation, results in the wrong answer. And that's a really big issue with the self-checking apps, because I wanted to see whether or not they could actually do the steps. Then if we need to work on the computation issues separately, in my opinion, that's kind of a whole separate thing. And I couldn't find something that allowed my students to practice without that computation being an issue. So that's why we are where we are today. So when you first log into, well, you don't log in yet because we haven't done that part, but when you first tap to open the Pug Math app, you'll see that you have a choice of either one-step equations, multi-step, or variables on both sides. For the purposes of this app, multi-step just means it'll take 2 or more steps in order to solve the equation. And the variables, even if there is more than one variable involved, it only is on one side of the equation. And I'm going to use that for this demonstration. So when you click on multi-step or variables on both sides, you get these options. You can say whole numbers only, allow negatives like terms, or distributive property. Now, obviously, you can't have an equation that only requires whole numbers and allows negatives at the same time. So when you choose the number of problems, I'm just going to choose 4 for the purposes here. The idea is that it's going to randomly pull from a bank, and one might only have whole numbers only, one would allow negatives, one might require combining like terms, one might have distributive property, for example, but it is a random sampling. So in a case like this, where I'm only choosing 4 problems, I might not necessarily get one of each type, if that makes sense, because it is like a random sample. So I'm going to click next. Directions are very basic, that the pug is sad if the variable is not isolated, and he's like sitting here in his little rainstorm. And once you get the variable isolated, the pug is going to be happy, and now he's under a rainbow. My own children like really wanted a pug to be involved in here in some way, shape, or form. So there we go. So now I'm going to click press to begin. And then the basic functionality of the keyboard is that these are pretty standard, with just adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. And then this little arrow that points to the left, whatever I type into the keyboard will apply only to the left-hand side of the equation. If I press this little arrow that points to the right, that will go to the right side of the equation. And then anything I want to apply to both sides, I will hit that arrow right there. So I would imagine that most teachers and most students, because most teachers probably teach them this way, would attack this problem by doing -2 on both sides. So let's say the student does something that's not mathematically feasible. So -2. But what if they forget that it has to be done to both sides? So they only click the left-hand side button. So I'm going to do that. And you can see that it shows the -2, and you can like scroll through and review your steps. You as the teacher can go back and look at that. And, but nothing happens, because anytime the student does something that's literally not mathematically feasible, like doing something to one side of the equation, that results in a change on the left-hand side, but not doing it to both, and then maintaining a balanced equation, you're just going to get the same equation over again. So I'm hoping that that will help students recognize, oh yeah, got to do it on both sides. So now I'm going to do -2 on both sides, and you can see you have a record of that. And then I don't know if maybe it's just my students, but I kind of think probably not. I have a lot of students who have the misconception that in order to get the 8 away from this x, to get the x by itself, that what they need to do is do a -8 on both sides. So watch what happens if I do -8 and I do it on both sides. It's not helpful to do -8 on both sides, but it's still not mathematically impossible to subtract 8 on both sides. And that was something that was really important to me, to allow students to be able to do things like that, that it's not really helpful to the goal of solving the equation, but it's not like impossible to do mathematically. So you can see that when the student did that, it does have a record of why they did, they did -8 on both sides, but now they're kind of in worse shape than where they started, because now they have 2 numbers to eliminate instead of just 1. So then I'll go back to, so the goal, hopefully, is that they'll be like, snap, I need to get rid of that -8 with a +8 on both sides. And oh yeah, that's right, I'm not going to do a -8, I'm going to do dividing by 8 on both sides instead. Now you can see the little pug dog is happy. It's kind of hard to see in this view up here, but you can see it on my iPad. And so we'll go to the next one. So because this one's pretty similar, I'm just going to go ahead and do +2 both sides and divide by 3 on both sides. And okay, good. So I was hoping I would get one of these. So this is the number one thing that I realized is wrong with the app. I'm already working on that. So you can't actually enter fractions into the keyboard. I'm really bummed. I get that's obvious. I should have realized that that was going to be a problem. My bad, working on it. And we are working on already figuring that out. And the reason that might be a problem for this problem, first of all, even though I know a lot of students probably won't actually attack the problem this way, we all know that technically speaking, you could divide both sides by 1/2, right? So it's kind of a bummer that I can't do dividing by 1/2 on both sides, because this keyboard does not allow you to do it the way that we currently have it programmed. Although again, we are working on that. But of course, one thing they can do is distribute, right? So just so you can see, if they hit distribute, and even though there's no distribution on both sides, if they do hit the both sides button, it will allow them to do that, as opposed to the previous issue where you can't just subtract something from one side and not the other. So that is one thing I'm working on too. So I do realize that could be a little bit confusing, but it does show, hey, nothing actually happened on this side. And then of course, the other issue with not being able to do fractions is that a lot of kids might want to add 5/2 to both sides, which we can't do currently with this keyboard. But what they can do is multiply everything by 2. So I'm going to hit ×2 on both sides, so that now that does, and I'm thinking about creating some kind of worksheet that the students do while they do some of these, that maybe requires them to explain what happened in between each step, so that this, because I know a lot of my students might multiply by 2 fully expecting this to happen, but they forget that you have to actually multiply this by 2 as well. So I'm thinking about making some kind of companion worksheet where students have to document everything that happens in between each step, explain it, something like that, so that they definitely recognize that this 5/2 got multiplied by 2 as well. So then I'm just going to do +5 and do it on both sides. Pug is happy. Last but not least, we've got a combining terms problem. So I would just hit combine on the left-hand side. You can see what happens there, and then divide by 4. So, and then the results page. So what happens here is that So for example, in problem number 1, where I deliberately like tried to cancel out that multiplication with adding, it really should have only taken me 2 steps to solve, and this documents that it took 4 steps for me to do that. So there is a record once you get finished. I know down the road, I'd like to do some kind of login that records everything, kind of like Khan Academy does or something. But right now, we're not quite there yet. But you can at least get a basic idea of how many steps it took the kids to solve each one. So obviously, this was only supposed to be a 2-step equation, but it took the student 4. So even if you weren't standing over him or her or they to, see what was happening, you at least have an idea. I think for now, while I'm just trying out the app,